Thank you. So first of all, welcome to our data analytics a tool for development session. I want to first of all to thank all of you, dear speakers, who have been available to be here and to discuss these most important issues with us. We are going to start with Selmer Bringsjord. Selmer is, and I'm reading what Selmer told me to say, is Director of the Reasoning and AI Laboratory at RPI and has been trying to understand the nature of AI in general and declarative data specifically for nearly 40 years. So you don't need an introduction, Selmer, because everybody knows you. You are most welcome and I'm most honored to have you in our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those ridiculously kind words. Not the ones I sent you, those were accurate. All right, so now I'll try to share. And keynote. All right, so yeah, my background is Norway, but this is set in Portugal, the parable here. And that's a reference to Edgar Allan Poe and his famous detective, C. Auguste Dupin. And we're going to put the detective into Porto, but the paper's title and the presentation's title more accurately is really what you see there in the subtitle, is Inferred Data Private. And that's just a picture from the purloined letter. There are 3 stories featuring this detective. This is the first detective in fiction Poe invented. Unless you're Norwegian, you don't accept that because of an author named Moritz who wrote a mystery that nobody knows about, but it's actually pretty interesting. So otherwise, Poe wins. There he is in the purloined letter, and the answer is going to be to the question in the subtitle, no, or apparently no. And I want to admit right off the bat, it'll soon become clear, I am very skeptical that currently any of us know what we're talking about when we're talking about privacy. There are very few rigorous definitions of what privacy or private data specifically is. And that for me is a problem because of the kind of work that I do. If you don't have a formal definition, then I have some issues. I'm still very happy to discuss and try to get one, but I have problems. If you email me, you can return to the abstract that basically gives the story. A couple is in Porto, overlooking the river from the south on a deck, and they have a conversation with a French gentleman who turns out to be this detective from Edgar Allan Poe. Dupin is extremely intelligent. Of course, that's true of all detectives, pretty much, except for things like Inspector Clouseau and comedies. At the bar on the deck, where you're sharing some drinks, the bottom line is that Dupin is able to learn an unbelievable amount of information about you just from a casual interaction. This is something that Sherlock Holmes does. Of course, we're still talking fiction, so the question is going to become, ultimately, can someone do this in real life? And my claim is they can. In fact, I have to admit, I might not be very good at it, but I do drive my wife a bit crazy by doing it. Sometimes I'm wrong, but quite often I'm right. About what? About inferences I make regarding other people, not necessarily deductive. So I won't ask you to read through the abstract. Now, the trick here is to use what's called sorities reasoning. In philosophy, this goes back, way back to the pre-Socratics, I believe. So we're talking, 2.5 millennia or something like that. I wrote a paper long ago when I was actually a graduate student in which I claimed that privately controlled data that you publish, songs, short stories, novels, doesn't matter what it is, even if you say it's copyrighted, which people do, at least in the United States, you don't control it. And anyone can copy that data from you, except for resale. They can copy it and do whatever the heck they want with it. And if you're interested, there's the paper. There's some commentary somewhere where someone said this is about the worst kind of philosophy I've ever seen in my entire life, unless you like to use a bit of formal logic in your philosophy, and then maybe it's not all that bad. So what is the sorities-style reasoning? Well, there's great coverage of it in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Most people know about it from the paradox of the salty hamburger. You take a hamburger, you put 1 grain of salt on the hamburger, which is this proposition here that says a hamburger with 1 grain of salt is not a salty hamburger. Doesn't matter if it's a hamburger, I don't eat hamburgers, but you know, whatever it is, put 1 grain of salt, it's not salty. If it's not salty with 1 grain, then it's not going to be salty with 2 grains. You keep building up until you reach, say, you know, 1,000 grains of salt. You end up with the ridiculous conclusion that a hamburger with 1,000 grains of salt is not a salty hamburger. I think originally in the pre-Socratic case, this was done with what's called in logic Mariology, heaps, groups, collections. There's something going really wrong here, and most people think it has to do with the vagueness of salty as an adjective. But that's the basic idea. It is usually called the sorites paradox, but it's a kind of reasoning. You can also do this with mathematical induction. So in case you're lucky enough to have been there, like me, as I told, I think, Isabel, not all that long ago, you know, I'd love to go back. So would my wife. Let's make this very concrete. This is south of the river, the great river that you should, and I'm saying this as a non-Portugal living person. I'm not there, but it's unbelievable. So this is south, and there's the deck where you meet the detective up there, okay? And where are you looking? Well, you're looking that way over the river, and it's just a wonderful evening, and people are socializing, all right? And again, Dupin starts asking you a few simple questions. He does know how old you are right away, plus or minus, you know, a couple of years. When you say your first sentence, he knows where you come from. He knows where you grew up. The same thing for your spouse, etc. It's in the abstract. All right, so let's shift gears and talk about privacy. Has anyone tried to lay out with some degree of precision what privacy means in the case of data? Yes, there is a monstrously large article here. So I'm not going to go into this in any detail by Solivay. Don't be misled by the fact that it says, it's just a law review. If you're a fan of journals, mainstream journals in AI or ethics or whatever it is. This is huge, seminal, and very comprehensive. So the basic picture for the kind of data I'm talking about is that you have a data subject, you collect the data somehow through, he says, surveillance or interrogation. Then you process the data, and there's a data holder that puts it in a database, and then the data can be disseminated. And in addition, this all has to be adversarial, especially in this world, because people are always trying to get hold of data and make use of it. So you have an adversarial situation, and maybe some of you know, in cybersecurity, this format has been semi-formalized, in some cases for cryptographic protocols, very, very formal. So that's the basic picture. This would be you on the deck in Porto. Now, we'll take 3 steps to, I think, create some rather sizable problems for people who think that current informal concepts of data and data privacy make sense. Step number one is we look at this setup, which is orthodox. This is not idiosyncratic from Solovay. So we have the agent that is the subject over here. We have the agent that is the data holder over here. Here we have what's going to be the database. And here we have possible others, people in the public, etc., to whom the information in the database can be disseminated. So one might say, what's an agent? I'm actually happy with Sule's earlier appropriation of the Russell and Norvig conception of an agent. However, that allows something to qualify as an agent without having beliefs, without knowing things, without having perceptual capacities, without having communication capacities, using natural language, etc. So you should think of these as agents mapping percepts to actions. However, the percepts and the actions have to be mediated by human level cognition. All right, so this is the basic diamond structure that we have preserved from Solovay. And now all we do to make this somewhat rigorous is we start using the relevant parts of computer science, AI, communication looked at formally. So what does that mean? That means that our detective here, or what's going to become our detective, our data holder, asks a question or makes a statement to the data subject. And I put these angle brackets here to indicate this. There's an underlying proposition that we can make formal, but it's actually in English in this case. It's in natural language. Any natural language will do. So query or question from the detective, response back in each case to the detective. And then what the detective does is this, takes what you feed back as an actual formula, adds to it background information that the detective has in mind, and in this case, deduces some proposition delta and then adds delta to the database. This is the database. It's a deductive database. If you know anything about deductive databases, that's what this is. This is not, don't be misled that this, this is some kind of fanciful. This can be implemented. This is very, very real, and so is this notion of deduction for databases. And then perhaps the data holder also operates as the adversary and extracts information from the database and shares it with other people, the public. So that's basically the scheme that's semi-formal. I give the bibliographic information here to Solovay's paper, if you're interested. Now, we make some changes to head toward problems. Number one, I change the traditional symbol for people in computer science and logic-based AI from deduction here to any kind of rigorous reasoning. Abduction is going to be key. Abduction is looking for an explanation of some piece of information you're given. It's not deductive, but we'd have analogical reasoning, abductive reasoning, etc. And also, we do something rather violent when it comes to current repositories, the current relational data repositories. We go beyond two values of true, false, and certainly we're going to do the same thing for three values, true, false, and unknown or indeterminate. We use a multivalent system. This is not usually done. So if you look at this book here, great book from the authority on the intersection of real world databases and formal logic, he pretty much says, I have no idea how to do, something being likely or unlikely or a probability of 0.7 versus 0.3 in my databases, so I'm not doing it. Our detective can do that. And so this database here includes likelihood or probability associated with propositions. So that's the basic setup. And we'll throw that away because we've moved beyond, again, just a bivalent scheme. Step two, well, it might not apply personally to you, but it certainly could apply to my wife and I, who engaged in this kind of interaction, not with Edgar Allan Poe's detective, I hope, but with other people. We are the subjects. And we are the people talking to, of course, we don't know that it's a super smart detective, but that's what we're doing. And that's what we all do every now and then. And in fact, if we don't enter into conversation, we still walk out in public. And we have people who are able to make, if they care to, all kinds of inferences about our clothing preferences. And from that, our cultural backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we make that instantiation. And then Dupin starts collecting information into the database. Now, I want to say I was once challenged. This is brand new work for me in the case of any kind of written down presentation or publication. But in my initial discussions, I was challenged by someone to actually do, and I'm not Sherlock Holmes, believe me, I'm just Selmer, okay? I was challenged, show me how this works, looking at me right now. And things got extremely uncomfortable in about 2 minutes, okay? The idea here is that Dupin starts with just your age, just where you come from. But then gradually, like the pieces of salt in the salty hamburger, starts building up by making additional inference based on little pieces of additional information to information that you really don't want people knowing, even though you go right out in public, move around, and have conversation. And so the idea is, in step 3, we let him keep going. You could cut the conversation off, and some people might have a sixth sense about this, but I don't think generally, people do. This ranges from the obvious, like, where there's an investment banking house in Lisbon, where there's a bank and someone comes out, goes in at a certain time, comes out at a certain time wearing a certain kind of outfit. You're probably pretty sure they're a banker. So it ranges from things like that to things that could be, a little bit more personal. But at any rate, we deploy the schema for sorities. A key question, I should say, in the abstract, that Dupin, he offers to buy one of 2 aperitifs on that deck in Porto, knowing full well that there's a big price difference between the 2, and knowing that they have not been on the menu except for that evening for the first time. And when he gets an immediate response, thank you, we'll take the X rather than the Y, he knows, I don't reveal this in the abstract, he knows immediately he's dealing with someone that knows a thing or two about champagne. Because it would be very impolite to say, I'll take Y when Y is 3 times as much money. And the speed of the response tells him everything he needs to know. All right, so that's basically the setup and the problem. And I want to leave some time for questions. So that's really it. I think I was supposed to start at 9 or 9:05 and finish maybe even by 9:30. So I want to leave time for any kind of question.
Go ahead, Selmer. Please.
No, I'm good.
Yeah.
I would love to do. I'm quite interactive. I'd be very happy to discuss this with anyone who's skeptical, etc. So I mean, this is absurd. I mean, I guess I'd just say, this is kind of crazy. If people like Dupin can just go out into the public and build up elaborate databases on people using perfectly seemingly innocuous interaction, what the heck do we mean, by private data? I don't know. I don't know why the data that'll end up in this database would customarily be considered private, but how could it possibly be private if it's acquired in this gradual, seemingly innocuous way?
Hey, Selmer. I don't particularly have a question. It's more of a comment, but I actually just saw.
I have to stop sharing because I can't see you.
Okay, no problem.
Assuming you want to be seen, because once
yeah,
I
why
see
not?
you, yeah.
So I saw something actually yesterday, which I think is really relevant to this, which is that I don't know who did this work, but there was this discovery in medical imagery analysis where they were trying to see, can these ML algorithms that are doing things with, you know, like mammogram scans or what is it, CT scans, chest X-rays, you know, obviously we don't want them to be biased by race or gender or any other protected categories, but they're finding that they can, these machine learning algorithms can determine race with high accuracy and gender and other things from these scans. Even when the scans are like significantly distorted, they'll destroy the quality of the scans. And somehow it's still finding ways to recover the race of the person who was scanned, gender, et cetera. And crucially too, the ML engineers don't know why. It's, you know, there's no explainability, so they don't know why, what features it's using to recover that. So it seems to me very relevant to what you're talking about, and, you know, indicates that it's a pressing issue because these are things that are being done right now.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Just for my personal organization, Selmer, we are already debating the issue, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know what Mike's, I don't know.
Will you go on with your slides after this?
I'm done. I finished my slides. I would just if I did anything, I would amplify those slides. I'm basically done.
Okay, just for me to know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a whole bunch of, I mean, I'd have to read. I have examples of the actual sentences, etc., but we can't, I need another 30, 45 minutes. Let me quickly answer that question. So yes, there are formal mathematical differences between my setup and what you're talking about. I think what you're talking about only becomes, if you will, a problem along the lines of what I'm talking about when human beings act upon the functions, and these could be basic classification functions that these machine learning, statistical connectionist machine learning systems have produced. When the humans act upon those things, they use common sense human reasoning that has structure, relational aspect, and then they can make deductions and they can make abductions and they can make analogical leaps. So we end up in the same really bad place. And in the case of machine learning, it's going to be virtually impossible to stop this from happening because of reasons you already point to, is that we're using this technology in the first place because we can't quickly discriminate. We can't quickly find out what it is about the massive amount of data that's being used that would give us the kind of relational content I'm talking about. I mean, that's why we use this. So yeah, this is a big problem. But I'm talking about a situation where someone drops in this Zoom session right now, sees my name, looks at the picture. Maybe they're observant enough to they might have biological information about biology and blue-eyed people, know where that came from, why that's an aberration actually, what its survival value was, name. Yeah, is this guy Norwegian? Yeah, I think he is. Yeah, he's Norwegian. They don't have to know, they don't have to run any machine learning stuff for that. So I agree with you, this is a major problem, but the interaction between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about is intricate.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Okay, some more questions from our panel or from the audience. Then I have one. It's not a question really. It's just a kind of a comment. Yeah, you raised a very important issue, is how human beings infer and collect evidence about the others in their normal interactions. And you mentioned that it was hard to define privacy. And when you said it, I remembered I worked for 12 years as a linguist and a lexicographer at the Academy Dictionary of Sciences, of the Dictionary of the Academy of Sciences. And it was a very hard work, believe me, having to define each word. My job was defining verbs and the argument structure for those verbs. Defining the words from scratch, just based in the evidence already in that time, given by a huge amount of data that was computerized and that we analyzed and inferred the probable meanings and the corresponding syntactic structures. But we had to define. If you were at the academy, you had to define what privacy means, because you had to. And you had to define it in a concise, accurate way. I can tell you that linguists and the semanticists that work in lexicography, sometimes they live with a word for weeks, trying to find out the best definition if you are working from the scratch. It's this to say, I'm not going to give you a definition of privacy. I have never worked on that word, but I think and I said this yesterday, and I keep saying, the values, the meaning is the most important thing in all this stuff, meaning making, and how we produce these meanings, how we assign values to these meanings, and how we interact. And the value we assign to words is a very important thing in all the theoretical building that we and all the models that we build. I believe it, but maybe I'm biased because I'm a linguist. Okay, thank you so much.
Isabel, may I contribute something, perhaps?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for thank you very much, Selmer, for bringing up this hot potato. At least it is a hot potato in legal academy. Legal academics have been trying to define privacy for, I think, over 50 years. And Sodave is one of the greater guys trying to put things together and trying to conceptualize things. But yes, he indeed conceptualizes privacy without defining it. And one of my professors has tried to make a definition, and I just like to put it on the table here and see if it's workable or not. And he has 4 elements which are to be comprised in a privacy definition. And he, of course, from a legal point of view, he says privacy is a subjective right. So there is a right holder who has some rights, and this right comprises thereof that the right holder should have some control over his private sphere. And a private sphere is a weird thing. It relates to home, to body, to family life, to correspondence, to intimacy, etc. But it can be distinguished from a public sphere. So he opposes a private sphere from a public sphere. And then he says it's a subjective right in rem. So it can be enforced against anyone who is not the right holder. And then he says it's non-assignable, and therefore it's a personality right. So it's a right that's intricate, that's intrinsic in someone's personality. And the 4th element is that he says it's a negative right. It's a right of non-interference from others. And it has many faces, this privacy right. There is medical privacy, physical privacy, relational privacy, and eventually also informational privacy. And that informational privacy is, I think, what we are discussing here. And there are different concepts between China, but the EU, the US, but indeed it's all a matter of definition. But there are some attempts being made, and I think that this is a very concrete one.
Yeah.
but I don't know how you see
Yeah,
that.
thank you very much, Roland.
Yeah, thank you. I should say immediately that I am very skeptical about rights talk unless it's immediately expressed in terms of obligation, prohibition, moral neutrality. I don't think that's a problem for some people who talk about rights, but if there's a negative right, that just gets cashed out as a prohibition against someone. But that really wouldn't affect the integrity, if you will, of what you're talking about. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to use that scheme because I don't think it's going to change my concern as expressed the way I expressed it, because I think the spheres, private and public, that whole notion, that's a wonderful metaphor, but I think it's pretty much operationally almost meaningless, and I think formally it's probably meaningless. But I don't want to be I'd love to study this account in detail, use it in the writing. Let me say, by the way, that there's a Cornell group that famously, in fact, I think it's somewhat related to what you described. That might not have been intentional, but where they say, hey, look, the private stuff is the stuff that you prevent people from inferring, despite the fact that people have plenty of information. Unfortunately for them, they define that inference exclusively in terms of deduction. So I would say about the scheme you're talking about, if you move around, then when you move pieces of information around or you move your body around in the world, realistically, you blow up the private public. You may think you don't, but you do. And if there's a way around that, maybe that could be accommodated in the account that you described. But all I need is for that to be essentially blown up by way of the kind of reasoning I'm talking about, to the point of absurdity. Now, you mentioned medical information. Well, you know, my family's in the hospital. My daughter just had, you know, a C-section. Oh my goodness gracious, what is inferable from outside the hospital, from in the waiting room? I don't know about this private public sphere. I really don't. If it's being sent in a database for the radiologist to analyze it, no, you don't have to intercept that to compromise privacy. But if I was invidious, Dupin is actually a nice guy, I don't really see it. I don't really see how to run a hospital and preserve privacy against the kind of minds I'm talking about.
There, you're very right. I hope everything's fine with your daughter to start with. Good.
Yes, Astrid. I now have a new granddaughter, Astrid. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I will shut up. But great. Please, Roland, you know, email me or text me. Yeah. So
But I will do. It's part of my PhD, and I hope it will be published at the end of this year. So I'll send it over.
Thank you. Please. Yes. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Any more questions? No? So Selmer, I just want to thank you for having mentioned, are you still there? Yes?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. For having mentioned Porto. First, I think that's a good challenge. Maybe Manuel and we all could think of organizing Icarus soon in Porto. Who knows? And
one of the great cities of the world. It's one of the great cities of the world. So that's all I can say. Thank you.
And thank you for the very challenging speech. Thank you.